The refrigerator hummed in the silence. Bryan had waited until Claire was upstairs to corner me. "What do you want?" he whispered. The polished mask he wore for the world was starting to slip. "To reconnect with my best friend. You didn't come back for that, didn't I?" He exhaled sharply. His eyes darted toward the hallway. "Name your price." I looked at him, truly curious. "You really believe everything has a price?" "Everyone does." I leaned in, my voice a silk-thin thread. "If I wanted your money, Bryan, I would have taken it 8 years ago, when it was still clean. Now, I'm looking for something much more expensive. My name is Elena. 8 years ago, I was exactly where every ambitious student dreams of being. I had perfect grades and glowing recommendations. A scholarship that meant everything to my family. Professors spoke about my future with total confidence. Success was already waiting for me just beyond graduation. At the center of that world was Professor Hall. He was the kind of man universities love to showcase. Charismatic, well-connected, and respected. His approval could open doors almost instantly. Students competed for his attention. His recommendation letters were known to launch careers. When he asked me to come to his office, I assumed it was about my thesis. The blinds were half closed, cutting the sunlight into long stripes. He leaned back with an easy smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Elena," he said warmly, "you're one of the most promising students I've taught." I thanked him, a little nervous, but proud. Then his tone shifted. He leaned forward, lowering his voice as though sharing a secret. "You want that in my class. You want the recommendation letter, the internship I mentioned." I nodded. He watched me, measuring something invisible. Then he said quietly, "You know what it takes." The room felt smaller somehow. I wondered if I had misunderstood him. People don't actually say things like that, not so openly. But the way he looked at me erased any doubt. My stomach turned. I stood up slowly. "No," I said. Just one word, but it felt like the most important word I had ever spoken. I left his office shaking, but I still believed the system would protect me. Investigations, ethics boards, procedures. The next morning I reported him, and for a brief moment, I felt relief. That feeling lasted less than a week. Professor Hall moved quickly. By the time the investigation began, the story had already changed. According to him, I had been the one making inappropriate advances. He claimed I threatened him when he rejected me. The accusation was absurd, but it had one advantage over the truth. He was a respected professor. I was just a student. The rumors spread through the campus like smoke. Some whispered I was desperate for attention. Others said I was too ambitious. The hearing felt like a performance where the ending was already decided. And that was when Bryan Schneider stepped forward. Bryan was Professor Hall's star student. Everyone liked Bryan. He had the kind of charm that made people trust him instantly. Professors praised his work ethic. Students admired how quickly he was climbing the academic ladder. He also needed something very badly: a grant. It was a massive research grant that could secure his entire career. Winning it meant instant prestige, connections, and a direct path into elite academic circles. Hall controlled the recommendations for that grant. When Bryan spoke at the hearing, he described me as unstable. He said I had complained frequently about grades, that I often talked about how unfair the system was, that I had once joked about doing whatever it took to get ahead. None of it was technically false, but the way he arranged those details painted a very different picture. The kind that made me look manipulative, calculating, dangerous. He spoke calmly, confidently, like someone presenting obvious facts. The worst part wasn't what he said. It was that he never once looked at me while he said it. The board ruled in Professor Hall's favor. Within a month, my scholarship was gone. My internship offer disappeared. Professors who once praised my work stopped returning my emails. Bryan received the grant. And not long after that, he married Claire, my childhood best friend. Claire had been part of my life for as long as I could remember. We met when we were 6 years old, two awkward children sitting next to each other on the first day of school. She had a habit of braiding my hair when she was nervous. I had a habit of rambling whenever silence felt uncomfortable. Somehow, those small habits turned into years of friendship. We studied together, shared secrets under blankets during sleepovers, whispered about our futures as if the world were something we would conquer side by side. Back then, The idea that she would marry the man who helped destroy my life would have sounded like the cruelest joke imaginable. When the news reached me years later, it felt less like a surprise, more like confirmation that life sometimes has a very dark sense of humor. But by then, I was already gone. I left the city quietly the night everything collapsed. No dramatic confrontation, no goodbye speeches, just a single suitcase and a folder I had been slowly filling during the investigation. Emails, notes, archived documents, fragments of conversations that never made it into the official record. Proof that the truth had been buried, not disproven. For years that folder stayed with me. Sometimes it sat untouched in a drawer. Sometimes I opened it late at night and read through the pages again, reminding myself that what happened hadn't been my imagination. The first year after leaving was the hardest. There is a strange kind of loneliness that comes from being publicly disgraced. People who once supported you begin avoiding you, not because they know you are guilty, because uncertainty makes them uncomfortable. Eventually, I stopped trying to defend myself. Instead, I started rebuilding, slowly, quietly, one small step at a time. Somewhere along the way, something inside me changed. The girl who had once believed the world rewarded honesty disappeared. In her place was someone more patient, someone who understood that time could be just as powerful as anger. 8 years passed like that. Then one morning I woke up and realized something strange. I wasn't afraid of that city anymore. The thought arrived quietly, almost casually. And once it appeared, it refused to leave. So I booked a ticket. The taxi ride from the airport felt surreal. Cities change in 8 years, but they also remain strangely familiar. New glass towers had appeared along the skyline, yet the streets still curved the same way they always had. The same cafes stood on the corners. The same crowded intersections buzzed with impatient traffic. As the taxi pulled to a stop, I stepped out and looked up at the skyline. For a moment, I simply stood there, letting the memories settle around me. Then something unexpected happened. I saw her. Claire was standing outside a boutique across the street, laughing into her phone. Her head tilted back the same way it always had when something amused her. One hand rested lightly on her chest as if she were catching her breath. The sight hit me harder than I expected. 8 years had passed, yet she looked almost exactly the same. When she finally noticed me, her expression froze. Her eyes widened slowly, as if her mind needed several seconds to accept what it was seeing. Elena? The phone slipped from her hand. Then she ran. She ran across the sidewalk and wrapped her arms around me so tightly that for a second I couldn't breathe. Oh my God, she laughed, her voice trembling with disbelief. Where did you go? I tried to find you. I looked everywhere. I hugged her carefully. I needed a fresh start. She pulled back and examined my face with the same intense curiosity she had always had. You look different, she said, hopefully in a good way. No, she said softly, stronger. The word hung between us. Before I could respond, her excitement returned. You have to meet my husband. The words landed like a stone in my stomach. Come on, she said, grabbing my arm. He's having lunch right now. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a quiet voice whispered that fate had a cruel sense of timing. Still, I followed her. The restaurant was modern and bright, filled with the quiet murmur of afternoon conversations. Claire led the way confidently toward a corner table near the window. Bryan, she called cheerfully. He looked up. The moment our eyes met, something inside him broke. I watched the color drain from his face so quickly, it was almost fascinating. The fork slipped from his hand and struck the plate with a sharp metallic clatter. For a brief second, the entire world seemed to pause. Claire didn't notice. She was already smiling widely. Bryan, this is Elena, my best friend from childhood. I told you about her. Bryan stood slowly. Up close, the transformation in him was even clearer. His confident posture had stiffened. The calm composure he had always displayed now looked forced. I extended my hand politely. Nice to meet you. His handshake was cold and trembling. Lunch unfolded in an oddly theatrical way. Claire filled the silence with cheerful conversation, describing their life together with the effortless pride of someone who believed everything around her was stable and secure. The house they had bought, the trips they had taken, the nonprofit foundation Bryan had built that seemed to attract admiration everywhere it went. Bryan barely spoke. When he did, his voice sounded tight, as if each word required careful control. His eyes kept drifting back to me, studying, calculating, trying to understand why I had returned. I asked polite questions. I complimented their success. I laughed when Claire told stories about their travels. Every interaction felt almost normal, which only seemed to make Bryan more uncomfortable. By the time the meal ended, a thin layer of sweat had formed along his hairline. Claire squeezed my hand happily. "You're coming over this weekend," she insisted. "We have so much catching up to do." I glanced at Bryan. His gaze locked onto mine. There was fear there now, clear and unmistakable. "I'd love to," I said. And I meant it, because something had already begun. Bryan could feel it. That weekend I arrived at their house with a small bottle of wine. I carried the careful calm of someone stepping onto a stage. Every movement mattered. Claire greeted me at the door with the same easy warmth she had always shown. The house behind her was beautiful. Wide windows, polished floors, the kind of quiet luxury that spoke of years of steady success. "Come in," she said excitedly. "You have to see the garden. Bryan hates gardening, so it's basically my kingdom." Her laugh echoed through the hallway. Bryan appeared a few seconds later. He looked composed again, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. For a moment our eyes met. The same silent understanding passed between us that had existed in the restaurant. He knew exactly who I was, and he knew exactly what he had done. Claire didn't notice any of it. She guided me through the house like a proud host, pointing out small details with the enthusiasm of someone sharing a life she loved. Photos lined the hallway walls. Vacations, charity events, smiling crowds gathered around Bryan at conferences. Every image told the same story: success, stability, admiration, a perfect life, the kind of life that rests very comfortably on the assumption that the past will stay buried. Over the next few weeks, I slowly became part of that life again. Claire and I slipped easily back into our old rhythm. We met for coffee, wandered through bookstores, spent long afternoons walking through parks, talked about everything we had missed in each other's lives. She shared stories about Bryan with obvious affection, how driven he was, how hard he had worked to build his reputation, how proud she was of the foundation he had created. I listened carefully, and Bryan watched. Every time we were in the same room, I could feel his attention like a shadow, following me from one corner to another. At first, he tried to ignore me. Then he began studying me, trying to figure out what I wanted, trying to guess when I might make a move. The uncertainty ate at him. I saw it in the small changes. The way he checked the front door lock twice before going to bed. The way his patience with Claire began to thin over small, meaningless things. The way he sometimes stared at me when he thought no one was looking, as if trying to measure the distance between the life he had built and the truth that could destroy it. The confrontation finally came one evening while Claire was upstairs. Bryan found me alone in the kitchen. For a moment he simply stood there, his hands resting against the counter. Then he spoke quietly. "What do you want?" I looked up from the glass. I was drying. "To spend time with my best friend." His jaw tightened. "You didn't come back here for that, didn't I?" The silence stretched. Finally, he exhaled sharply. "Name your price," he said. "Whatever this is, we can settle it." The words hung in the air between us. Money, connections, influence. In Bryan's world, every problem eventually had a number attached to it. I set the glass down carefully. "You think money repairs 8 years of damage?" I asked softly. His voice dropped lower. "You're going to destroy everything I've built." I met his eyes. "No," I said. "The truth will do that." At that moment, Claire's footsteps sounded on the stairs. Bryan straightened instantly, his expression smoothing back into the confident composure he showed the rest of the world. But the fear was still there, and now it had begun to grow. While Bryan struggled to maintain control, I began quietly revisiting the past. The internet never forgets as completely as people assume. Old university forums still held fragments of conversations from that time. Archived articles mentioned the investigation. A few former classmates remembered small details that had once seemed insignificant. Slowly, carefully, I gathered those pieces. I didn't publish the evidence all at once. I released it slowly. A question here, a document there, just enough to make the right people start asking the wrong questions. I began placing the files where curious eyes might notice them. Quietly, carefully, academic forums, anonymous tips, journalists who had built their careers chasing corruption in higher education. None of it looked dramatic on its own, just small ripples. But ripples have a way of spreading. At the same time, Claire began noticing changes in Bryan. He became defensive when she asked about his university years. He brushed off questions too quickly. Sometimes he responded with irritation that surprised even him. One evening during dinner, she asked casually, "You never talk about Professor Hall anymore. Didn't you two work closely together?" Bryan froze for a fraction of a second. Then he laughed lightly. "That was a long time ago." Claire tilted her head slightly. "You always said he helped launch your career." He shrugged. "People exaggerate those things." She didn't press further that night, but I could see the curiosity beginning to take root. A week later, there was a knock on my hotel door. When I opened it, Claire stood there alone. Her eyes were red. "Can we talk?" We sat across from each other in the quiet room. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then she asked the question she had been holding back. "Elena, what really happened back then?" Her voice trembled slightly. "I need the truth." So I gave it to her, not dramatically, not with anger, just the quiet facts. Professor Hall's offer, my refusal, the accusation that followed, the hearing where everything collapsed, and Bryan's testimony. Claire listened without interrupting. By the time I finished, tears were sliding silently down her cheeks. "I married him," she whispered. "You didn't know," I said gently, "but you lost everything." The words hung in the air between us. Eventually, she stood. "I need to talk to him." The confrontation happened the next day. Later, Claire told me how it unfolded. At first, Bryan denied everything. Then he tried to minimize it. "I didn't ruin her life," he insisted. "I just told them what I thought was true." Claire stared at him. "You knew what you were doing." His voice grew desperate. "I needed that grant. It was my chance." "And her life?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer. That silence said everything. Claire packed a suitcase that night. The divorce process began soon after. And while their marriage collapsed, the ripples I had started in the past began to grow into waves. Journalists uncovered old records. Witnesses who had once stayed silent began speaking. Articles questioning Bryan's reputation spread rapidly online. Sponsors distanced themselves from his foundation. Within months, the empire Bryan had built around his reputation began to crumble piece by piece. The man once praised as a visionary suddenly became a cautionary headline. Claire and I spent many long conversations, rebuilding something that had been damaged years earlier. Trust takes time, but truth has a strange way of clearing space for it. Eventually, we decided to create something new together. A nonprofit dedicated to helping students report abuse of power without fear of retaliation. Something that might have helped the girl I once was. Bryan's story ended very differently. His foundation dissolved under scrutiny. His reputation faded quickly once the admiration surrounding it disappeared. Months later, I saw Bryan again, not in person, in a photograph attached to a news article about the investigation into his foundation. He stood outside a courthouse surrounded by reporters, looking smaller than I remembered. For the first time since I had known him, Bryan Schneider looked like a man who understood that the story he built his life on had finally run out of pages. The world moved on, the way it always does. Sometimes people ask me if the revenge felt satisfying. The truth is, revenge was never the real goal. What mattered was reclaiming the truth that had been buried. 8 years ago, I left that city believing my future had been stolen. When I walk those same streets now, I realize something important. The life they tried to destroy was only the beginning. And sometimes the most powerful victory isn't watching someone fall. It's realizing you survived long enough to rise higher than they ever expected. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe.